when there's a disagreement, they're yelling at each other. Like in our group, we might have a disagreement, not that often, but then.
Thank you so much for joining us for this really, really exciting event. Before I get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Bloul people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd just like to pay respects to their elders past, present and future. It is my pleasure today to welcome you on behalf of the Middle East Studies Forum. I'm wearing two hats today. I am both the seminar convener of the Middle East Studies Forum and also a co-convener of the WoMENA network. So it's my pleasure to welcome you here today for this really, really exciting event on women in the Middle East uprisings. And I'll hand over to Yasmin to introduce our panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I know afternoons are sometimes not the easiest time to come to these sorts of things. So it's really lovely to see so many people here to join us for the first public event that our network is having. I want to start off just again by thanking MESF for allowing us to use the space and for, before we came together, also convening a really important space for researchers in Australia who work on the Middle East. So that has been in place for a long time, and it's really lovely to be involved in that family too. I wanted to just start off by introducing our network, as this is, we're all members of that network, and this is our very first public event, so we're very excited about that. So WoMENA is the Women and Non-Binary Researchers Network for people who work on the Middle East in Australia, and it's the brainchild of these two lovely women in front here as well, so Dara and Marika. And the network really came together and is designed for researchers who are women and non-binary people, policymakers, humanitarians as well, and researchers in Australia with a specific focus on the Middle East region and North Africa, of course. And we're very excited to have that this public event today being our very first one, in which we also get to celebrate International Women's Day and really shed light on what some of the things that women in the region that we all look at and study and perhaps also come from, what women have been doing there. So it's really great to be able to celebrate and to learn more about that as well. A big part of the call to action for our network and why the three of us started it is to really make sure that the voices of the women or the people in the network that we have is reaching a wider audience. So specifically in media spaces in Australia, to make sure that we're hearing kind of more diverse voices, different analysis, and making sure that the work that our members do is being reached and having a wider audience, and also to build a network amongst ourselves so that we can build that support. So if anyone does similar work or is interested, we'd also really love to have you, so please get in touch with one of us and we can have you come on board as well. Okay, so today I think I should perhaps introduce the speakers a little bit. So we've got four very wonderful speakers who will have slightly different expertise or different countries that they focus on, speaking about the role that women have had in the recent uprisings, the recent protest movements across the Middle East, North Africa region. So we've got Hadeel on the very end, who's going to be speaking to the Iraq case specifically. We have Aslihan, who's going to be talking about Turkish politics and the politicization of women's bodies therein. Scheherazade, we're very happy to have as well. So she has been working on Morocco and the protest movements there, so I'm really excited to hear what she's got to say as well. And at the very end, we're going to have Azadeh, who's speaking about the Iranian election, and also I've heard her speak a lot about the women's movement in Iran, so I'm really excited to hear what you've got to say today as well. Okay, so how we're going to do this is everyone is going to have about 8 or so minutes to speak, and we're going to hear about their expertise. And then afterwards, we're going to have some question time amongst us, and we'd also love to hear from you, some questions that you have for the speakers. So we might start off, Hadeel, if you'd like to go first. Is that throwing her in?
I tried to escape this by coming in here. It's all right, that's fine. So am I going to have the...
If you'd like to go, do you want to go up to the lectern?
All right, yeah, that will be fine.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, on the 8th of February 2020, Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia cleric and a militia leader of Saraya al-Salam and one of the influential figures in political and social life in Iraq, tweeted what he called the Pact of the Reform Revolution. He listed 18 items that he urged not only his followers but also any protesters to implement inside protest tents and demonstration zones. Among these behests is number 9, where he says that the Sharia's rules and social codes of this country must be taken into consideration. The mix between genders inside the protest tents is not acceptable, and that the protest zones must be clear from drugs, alcohol, or any other type of inebriants. So the tweet delimited the religious background of the protesters to Muslims only. It disparaged women's involvement in the protest by discrediting them and limiting their participation into sharing tents with male protesters, with a clear reference to drug and alcohol use. So responding to this segregative and regressive tweet, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi women marched on the 13th of February in several Iraqi cities such as Baghdad, Al-Basra, Dhiqar, Karbala, Babylon, and even the protest included Al-Najaf city, which is the religious center of Shia around the world. The protesters carried signs such as "Inta bil-i'tad wa ani bil-i'nad." If you use your ammunition, I'll use my determination. And we are the nation. Who are you? إحنا الوطن. أنت منو? And I am a revolution. أني ثورة. The rally also aligned with Valentine's Day. Women carried balloons, heart-like toys, or signs to express their love and support for Iraq as their beloved homeland. The hashtag of the purple and pink protest was quickly circulated, and the most trending was بناتك يا وطن, the daughters of the nation, and صوتك ثورة مو عورة. Though this hashtag literally means your voice is a revolution and it is never an indecent act, but it goes beyond this vocal expression to cover their participation, visibility, and recognition in the protest that started since the 1st of October 2019. So we have a huge number of different women from different backgrounds, cross-generational scope, and political orientation and interest wore the gender-coded color pink or purple. Some wore purple or pink head covers such as hijab, scarves, others put on jackets or coats or shawls. However, the majority wore pink or purple yashmar. And the yashmar is a head top piece that is usually used by, it is part of male outfits in MENA region, and it is also used and worn by Kurds and Arabs. So the significance that those female protesters cleverly worked on lied in the choice of these two colors as they blend with the yashmar. This performative act has brought in one piece of cloth the reference to both genders and nationalities, Kurds and Arab, men and women. So they wanted to say that Iraqi women and men, in their plural performativity, have been composing a singular lobbyist that lays claim for social, economic, and political justice. But let's go back a little bit and see what Iraqi women have been doing in this protest. So the pink and purple protest came to highlight that women led resistance committees and sit-ins, planned protest routes, and disobeyed curfews. They stayed overnight in protest tents. That's what Azadeh was trying to highlight and taking it away from the whole context of the protest. And by doing this, they have violated one of the deep-rooted traditions in Iraq that disapproves women's staying overnight in public places. Even in the midst of a declared state of emergency that left women vulnerable to security forces, you will find women in streets and squares, public squares. Many were tear-gassed, threatened, assaulted, and abducted, and in some cases killed. So to name a few of female activists who were abducted, we've got Sabah al-Mahdawi, Mari Mohammed, Ayat al-Marsoumi, Khulud al-Ta'i, and most recently Rana al-Sumaydai, and she is a prominent female member in al-Sadr movement. So she herself posted on her official page on Twitter how she was abducted by al-Sadr movement members because she started to share on public her anti-position to his suppressive approach to the protesters. Zahra Ali al-Qaralusi, 19-year-old participant from a Kurdi family background. Her family lives in Baghdad. Her body was found in front of her house on the 2nd of December 2019. Zahra Ali Sarah Talib and her husband, their 4-year-old daughter, were also killed because Sarah was a field nurse and participated in covering the protest and posting updates on her social media profiles. So, but not only that, in the protest zone, women are also cooking food, providing home-made meals. They are washing protesters' clothes, nursing and attending the wounded. They are praying in the public, which is unpreferable for women to do so in public and open spaces from an Islamic point of view, as Islam sets clear binaries between private and public spaces for religious practices, specifically for women. And I think this act by itself needs another session to analyze its significance as it crosses religious and traditional norms. They are active on social media and posted live streams from Tahrir Square in Baghdad or Al-Haboubi Square in Diqar al-Nasiriyya, and this is also precarious as they are easily traced, targeted once they are spotted. Their smartphones could be smashed or taken away. Needless to refer to the significant role played by activists in posting and updating the idea what's going on in the protest squares. Art and activism was also a new trajectory of visibility for Iraqi women. They utilized public spaces, playing music, reading poetry, and drew graffiti on walls and even the security blocks that isolated the Tahrir Square. Their visibility in the protest was not limited to logistically supporting the male protesters, but it goes way beyond the cultural, social, and religious legacies. Their field involvement comes at a political moment that is described as hyper-militarian, hyper-sectarian, hyper-masculine, and patriarchal. So we are talking about taboo breakers who have been accused of infidelity. They have been discredited and their family names were dishonored, and even sometimes referred to with the pejorative references such as prostitutes or the whores of the nation. Despite the fears, intimidation, and abduction, the pink and purple protest suggested women's hyper-visibility that is presented through a trajectory that women wanted rather than politicians, male family members, or clerics. So it invited a break with the politico-tribo-sectarian triangle that regulated gender norms and Islamicized, sectarianized, and sectarianized women's social recognition. I know I don't have that much time, but I just want to say that the pink and purple protest, it is important to situate it within the uprising that MENA is witnessing. It is really hard to surpass the iconic figure of Ala Saleh, who helped fueling the Sudanese protest. And again, to situate it within the global protest promoted, performed, and fueled by women in Brazil, India, Buenos Aires, France, and it is also to refer what is next, and I think it would be that the contemporary social movement that parallels the political mobilization in several zones around the globe is witnessing a new era for women, that they are not part of the protest, they are the protest, they are the revolution. Thank you.
it's frozen, or I can't remember.
It's been a week of technical difficulties. Yeah, it's like, oh,
Is that fine?
we're great.
For some reason
Okay. So I will be talking about gender politics, but I am not a specialist on gender politics, to be honest. But I'm doing this presentation as a feminist, as everyone should be, I think. So my country of origin is Turkey. So I will be presenting my views based on the studies in 2000s on women and their representation in media, in secular and Islamist media in Turkey. So I'll start with the background, and then we will discuss. I will be presenting the women's stereotypes in Turkey. It's presented in the Turkish secular and religious media. And I will be commenting on secular religious ideology and representation of the women body, and we will come to the social media in the 2020s, because the studies that I reflect on are really old studies. For some reason, there are no studies that are made in after 2010. So that's a venue that can be studied, I think, for those who want to get involved in such a study. Do you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So in Turkey, Westernization began in 18th century. For those who are familiar with the history of the Middle East and Turkey, and with the Westernization, there was an assertion that the original Turkish family was characterized by equality of spouses and respect for women, and every attribute for the inferior position of women was actually a foreign or Arabic influence. After the foundation of the Turkish Republic, with the secularism accepted as state policy, and the Islamic institutions and the abolishment of the Islamic institutions, the official line of the Republic has fostered the acceptance of Western ways and rejection of backward Eastern customs that deemed women as an inferior or not equal to men, so to speak. But obviously, we will see that it was not always rainbows and butterflies. In the early days of the Republic, the Islamic potential was unorganized and confined to rural, uneducated sectors. However, with the founding of Islamic political parties after 1960s and the revival of Islamism or Islamic orders and their associated parties and mass media, Islam gained considerable strength in urban parts of Turkey, especially in the second half of 1980s, with the rise of the Islamic parties to power in 1995, and later on, the religious ideology asserted that women and men have been created different and unequal. Women, so according to that ideology that started in 1980s and went on to 1990s, women are weak and conniving by nature and should live under the jurisdiction and protection of men. Two female witnesses, we all know that in Quran, it says that two female witnesses are the equal of one male witness in court, and women's share of parental inheritance is 1/2 of that man. Although this was not, obviously the secular state doesn't allow this, the ideology and the media purported these ideas. And thus, women demanding equality with men was characterized as disobedient, and according to religious ideology, inequality was based on ascribed characteristics and was likely to be perceived as stable and justified by the religious ideas. So when we look at the women's stereotypes in media in general, in the research, Western research, we see that women's stereotypes are actually there are three main stereotypes. One is the housewife. As we can imagine, it incorporates the good, selfless, and socially skilled aspects of conventional women. The other one is the career woman, who is well groomed and also have some male gender stereotypical traits such as gender ambition, activity dominance, egotism, and suppression of feelings. And finally, the WAMP, which is the materialistic outgoing sex object. And among the three of these general stereotypes, women stereotypes, career woman represents the values of gender equality in Turkey. The career woman is construed as the prototypical woman to be endorsed by the secular view and represents the exercise of rights and privileges granted to women by the Republican area. According to religious ideology, on the other hand, a woman's career is likely to conflict with her primary roles as mother and housemaker, and work outside the home is tolerated as necessary evil to be accepted only in the case of dire need. The housewife, on the other hand, implies family focus and possible dependence and gender inequality. So, although not exactly the ideal, the housewife is an acceptable type for the secular sector because of the view that women have a pivotal position within the family and are dispensable as teachers of children according to the Islamic ideology. So obviously, as we can all expect, the WAMP stereotype represents the rejected prototypical templates for the religious sector, but also it is not really welcomed in the secular ideology. And yes, so WAMP is both WAMP is the WAMP stereotype is denied both by the secular and when we look at the media, secular and the Islamist media doesn't have positive representation of the WAMP women. When we come to women and ideologies in Turkey, we must underline that women constitute part of a rhetoric for both religious and secular discourse for ages in Turkey due to the concept of women becoming the symbol of both ideologies. So we see that in Turkey, woman is a symbol for both secular and Islamic ideology. Opponents in this controversy utilize media in creating and advocating their representations of the valued and devalued types of women, thus describing and prescribing normative women according to their ideologies. A study that I found, which was very interesting, was conducted in 2003, examined representations of women in Turkish religious and secular daily newspapers based on social identity theory. It was predicted that religious and secular newspapers would differ with respect to evaluated references to mother, homemaker, career woman, and WAMP subtypes. Secular and religious newspapers were examined, and the analysis of this examination revealed that secular newspapers included higher proportions of positive references to career women and WAMP stereotypes than did religious newspapers. The two types of newspapers, one religious, one secular, also differed with respect to the proportion of women mentioned as agents and targets, and with respect to the actions performed by women agents and items related to victimization of women. The important thing here in this study is that in both religious and secular newspapers, technically women were underrepresented despite any kind of stereotypes. So it's up.
Yeah, do you want to finish your last point?
Yeah, it's already finished. So as a conclusion, I wanted to show you this video, but I will skip that. So the victim image of women, from my observation, has reduced after 2010 with the abolition of the ban of the hijab and the headscarf. And unfortunately, in the media today, there are no presence of women in discussion programs, in discussion shows, and it's all male-dominated, as we expect. Secular ideology and anti-Islamist arguments continue through women image in the media. So we still in Turkey, it is prevalent that the woman is still there as a symbol of both ideologies, but we don't have the presence of women in actual media. So only their image is there, but we don't have their presence, unfortunately. So thank you for listening. That's all from me.
This one? I'm not sure it's working. This one is.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. So today I'd like to talk about the instrumentalization of gender politics by the Moroccan state, as well as highlight some Moroccan women's activism from a cross-section of society. So on the 31st of August last year, 2019, investigative journalist Hajar Raissouni was accosted outside a gynecology clinic in Rabat, along with her fiancé, Dr. Anesthetist and administration staff member. Raissouni was arrested under Article 453 and 490 of the Penal Code. That is, undergoing an illegal abortion and having extramarital sex. So Raissouni writes for an independent newspaper, Akhbar Harayum, where she covers issues of corruption, clandestine migration, and recently, before her arrest, wrote on politically sensitive issues in the country, including on the political prisoners of the RIF movement in the north of the country, one the state wants to keep under control. So she was detained at the local police station, interrogated, and forced to go a gynecological examination. In other words, she experienced state-sanctioned sexual assault that she says she experienced as rape. She was transferred to prison and sentenced on September 30 to 1 year in prison and fined. 16 days later, on October 16, she was officially pardoned by the king and released from prison, along with the others. So to this day, she denies having an abortion. And I think this is important to note that this was not the reason she was arrested. Her arrest was politically driven. When in prison, she wrote that the interrogations were to do with her work and family. Two of her uncles are politically influential. One is a well-known Islamist scholar, and another is a leftist columnist, and her cousin is also a human rights defender. In other words, authorities used Hajar's body to target her family by instrumentalizing a piece of gendered law to silence. So by extension, the target here was freedom of expression and opinion. Keep quiet, otherwise the state will stop at nothing to discredit you. One of the silver lining in Raissouni's detention, however, was that it fueled a debate among women's reproductive rights, which bans abortions unless pregnancy poses a threat to the mother's life. Around the same time of her arrest, the government was about to start considering proposed legal reforms to partially legalise abortion in cases of incest, rape, mental disorder, and serious fetal malformation. But according to lead researchers who spent numbers of research in abortion in Morocco, Irene Capelli says this conditional legislation merely reinforces the structural barriers to legal and safe abortion, and that the logic underpinning such reforms, legitimising a moral hierarchy of abortion while simultaneously neglecting that abortion should be a reproductive right. So by placing the onus on women to prove that they are deserving of an abortion under the aforementioned cases, these potential reforms are coherent with Morocco's unequal healthcare system and neoliberal logic, where institutions, both public and private, provide healthcare on the condition of their ability to demonstrate they deserve them. So NGOs say that between 600 and 800 women have clandestine abortions every day in the country. But last year, only 73 were tried for having abortions, which usually involve the practitioner, but almost never the patient, according to data from some human rights associations. So now, at the time of her arrest, Morocco's active civil society mobilised through a series of direct actions, protests outside the court and parliament, and active media and online campaigns. This case triggered international outcry. For more than a month, Morocco was in the spotlight, as were its questionable police practices against dissidents and its laws denying citizens the basic freedom to control. Two in particular were noticeable. I've got them up here. So one was a collection of videos of female women identifying journalists from around the world, lining the use of gender to silence, combining the use of gender to silence a muzzle, and the other based on individual liberties and calling for the removal of laws regulating women's body, in particular Article 490. So both initiatives were set up by Moroccan women. So the debate became more about women's rights and individual freedoms, rather than the detention of journalists by means of gendered law. For many activists who critique the collective 490, it was a gift that landed in the hands of the state, as taboo topics of abortion and sexual freedoms became the centre of the media's debate. For many feminists, the repeal of these laws will lead to more rights for women, queer people, and by extension, other freedoms of expression, which, mind you, are meant to be a right under the 2011 Moroccan constitution. So many were caught in a hard place, what do you talk about? How much time do I have? So 3-4 minutes. Okay, cool. So I really wanted to talk about some other movements. One more thing I'd like to say about this particular case is that out of the 600 to 800 abortions that take place each day, 2/3 are performed by doctors. And this miscarriage of basic human rights has led to human rights defenders saying this could lead to more reluctance to perform abortions and may compel more women to resort to dangerous or non-medicalised abortions. So, as International Women's Day has revolutionary roots, which I think has been lost when we talk about International Women's Day. So in the West, it has origins in 1908, when thousands of women garment workers marched through New York City to protest the working conditions. And this was spearheaded by the Socialist Party of America, but also took true revolutionary form in Russia in 1917 amid widespread food shortages, where women took to the streets on Women's Day demanding an end to World War I and austerity measures. They also disobeyed male revolutionaries like Trotsky when they were meant to wait till May. This march grew to daily mass strikes from workers from all sectors, and the Tsar Nicholas II abdicated a week later. And for me, this is the essence of women's participation in political protest. So similarly, in Morocco, women have been, or in North Africa, women have been at the centre of, and the rest of the world, women have been at the centre of movements and social change throughout North African history. So, for example, women played a huge role in anti-colonial struggles, both against Arab invaders, but also obviously against the Western colonisers. There are stories of great Amazigh or Berber women warriors that many young women in particular talk about. And so just before I spoke about working women and the bread protests, and I would like to talk about working women in Morocco. And by working women, I mean those in the working classes who work on land, in agriculture, in factories, domestic labour, and so on. Those in rural areas with less access to state services, including health and education. And rural areas also have the higher rates of illiteracy. So I think for rural women, the average illiteracy rate is close to 80% in rural Morocco, and that's opposed to 50% nationwide. But that doesn't stop working women from being active in social movements across the country, where often they are at the forefront and heart of the struggles. And we can see this if we evoke Moroccan socialist and feminist Fatima Mernis's call to look at the margins. If we want to understand what's really going on in contemporary Moroccan society, she says we should be looking not at its urban centres, but rather at the peripheries. So at the global north-south border, that is between Europe and Africa, so that's in the northern region of Morocco, women have been actively playing a role in the Iraq movement, and that's the picture I've got up there, which is calling for better socioeconomic conditions and social justice. So this Amazigh, indigenous non-Arab part of Morocco, gave birth to the largest mobilisations the country has seen since 2011. It was also pacifist, and women here played a key role in organising. And we can also see similar dynamics in the struggle for water rights in southeast Morocco, in the it's an arid region near the Sahara. So Amazigh women have been central in protesting against the most productive mine in Africa. I think it's the 7th largest silver mine in the world, which sucks groundwater from their agricultural lands. So since 2011, for 8 years, the residents of Imida, in a rural town, have organised evoking traditional methods of participative democracy called the agrau, where all decisions are made by consensus. The protest camp was successful in shutting down the valve to one of the mine's biggest wells that uses the village's groundwater. So as active agents of change, they were not only making sure their children got a say in the around 0 minutes, okay, I'll just go. But they were also at the forefront of the movement. So Amazigh societies are traditionally matriarchal, but yeah, I just wanted, maybe we can talk about this when we, there's also been some great successful grassroots movements looking at the inheritance of land, which happened last year. So let's talk about that afterwards.
Thank you.
Hello everyone and good afternoon. Welcome to this event. I'm going to talk about Iranian women in election. There was a recent election actually before coronavirus getting widespread and affecting everything in Iran, and everyone is in quarantine in his or her house. So Iran had an election, and it was parliamentary election and also city and local councils election. So I'm going to talk about how this time Iranian women participated in this election and what happened to the women parliament members. Before I go to explain about this election, just wanted to give you an overview of what happened in the previous election in Iran. Actually, the political participation of women in the previous parliament increased a lot comparing to before. And despite the cultural and political barriers, the number of registered female candidates have increased. And also, one of the significant results was the election of female parliament members such as Parwan Salashuri and Fatima Zoghar. Both of them are from reformist camp, and they did lots of things in favor of women in the parliament. And these members could create an atmosphere for change, especially by uniting women's fraction in the parliament. And also, Parwan Salashuri on the left-hand side, she had a really powerful speech about the political arrest in November, and then she was summoned to the Islamic court because what she had told about these things, and then she has resigned for being a parliament member for a recent election. Last last 4 years, where women were part of the election, the number of them increased, especially in rural areas. And some part of the countries, as you can see to the data, around 34% elected campaign to 2013. However, they are decreased in 16 provincial capitals and to remain the same, while 11, including Tehran, saw increase in women being elected to councils. Another interesting fact is about Iran's Sistan Balochistan province, which is one of the underdeveloped and impoverished area in southeast part of Iran, with the highest percentage of illiterate girls and women in the country. So a total number of 415 women elected to the office. And in another village, which was very interesting, that called Afzalabad, located in province Hajj district, all of 10 elected candidates were women. So that's another interesting fact happened. And those areas are from the areas that lots of traditional families are living there. They are against the female work, even working, and then, but despite those facts, all of them were women. And some of the concern that Iranian women had campaigned and included women's civic engagement were citizen rights, employment, education, health, social security, and lots of things that actually encourage these women to become parliament members. But what happened in the recent election was that this is actually, it's not only because of women. It's because the atmosphere of the country is very influenced by the Iran's foreign policy to the West, especially United States, and also the position of Iran in the region. So, although due to these facts, so lots of people inside and out, inside Iran, because the parliament only could vote inside, they have boycotted this election because they said that all of the candidate members are from just one camp and lots of others were disqualified. So although the participation rate has decreased, but the number of female candidates remain the same. And lots of female, as I said, candidates from Reformist Party have been disqualified. So comparing to the previous one, that we had the majority of reformists that did lots of things in favor of women for the parliament, but this round, none of them were presented. And even some of them, such as Fatemeh Rahbar and Zohre Elahian, are from Fundamentalist Party, and there was no hope for any positive change for the next parliament. Actually, Fatemeh Rahbar, she passed away 2 days ago because of the coronavirus, so only one of them remained, and so one of the female candidates decreased because of that. There are some differences between the recent parliament election and the previous one. As I said, the number of them, 19%, decreased according to the government statistics. However, some people believe that the number are higher. There were lack of women campaigns and support from women rights activists inside and outside Iran. Because no one believed in this election, and they said that none of the candidates were our candidates. So there wasn't any campaign or activities regarding women's presence in the parliament. And we had a campaign 4 years ago, changing the male face of the parliament, and that was very influential. That led to Parvin Said-Ashuri's election. But this time, there was no activists supporting these women. So as I said, boycotting the election inside and outside Iran, and most of the reformist camp have been disqualified and they didn't participate in the election. And women who were from the fundamentalist camp and did not have any achievement in relation to women's issues. So the two that I already mentioned, they haven't done anything positive about women. And even some women rights activists, they say that even they are against women, because one of them who passed away, she said that we have to segregate universities, and another one. So these are like the things that happening that their presence would not help to women's issues in Iran. So it would be better if they weren't selected, because they couldn't have any more. So that's the major these are the major differences. There are several barriers for women candidates in Iran, and there are actually lots of things, so I could just put some of them here. But if I want to refer, the first barrier is that usually Iranian people, I mean some traditional and religious family, they believe that the parliament is a place for men, and it's not a place for women. Another thing is that they don't trust women as men, so they usually don't vote for women. They have a negative attitude toward women's functions in the political structure, and they don't support their political activities. Also, another thing we can see that the Iranian media, like national TV and radios, they do not support female candidates. They do not show any of their campaigns or any of their advertisement. Another thing is that there isn't any relationship between women's fraction in the parliament and women's rights activists in Iran, and that's one of the things that stop lots of female candidates to go into the parliament, and some of them they cannot get votes. Another thing is that women cannot be trained to be a political leaders inside Iran, so they learn it by themselves rather than being taught. Whereas for men, we had such things, that we had seminars and things even in political parties. Another thing that sorry, I can't see. This is 0. Okay. That's like a circle.
I didn't check for that.
Okay, so just 2 more. And the other thing is that, as I said, there is another thing that I want to refer is that Rouhani's failure to support women candidates despite his promises, his election, and also when women's participation in recent protests were that they actually participated more even than men. So the government decided to put more pressure, and they arrested lots of women's rights activists. So these are basically the barriers, and that led to elimination of some of women from the parliament. Thank you. Thanks, Oli.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. I think they were very diverse but really insightful presentations as well, which doesn't make my job as chair very easy.
No, but it's really great. I think often the starting point for discussions like this about the role of women in the region come from the assumption that women don't do very much or are not politically active or come from an identity of victimization, and that definitely was not the starting point for the discussions that we had today. And I think that's really great because we're able to get insights from the four of you about the role of gender and the role of women in the different contexts that you look at. So that's kind of where we're going to start with, I think, today. So what I'm going to do is ask maybe a couple of questions myself, and then I'll throw it to the floor to hear from the rest of you about some of the curiosities that you might have. And I'll throw this out to all four of you and pass the mic along, or Azadeh has it. So just feel free to jump in with some ideas that you might have about the questions. I think something just really broad that came across the four of your presentations is that there's a lot of weaponization or understanding or assumptions about the role that women and the role that gender might have in determining who gets to do what, where women are allowed, where women can take up roles, and where maybe it's not so considered so appropriate. And we hear from all four of you some challenges of that, some things that are very deeply rooted because of the religious ideas that exist in society, but also some of the political ideas that exist. But I want to really hear from you, if you could speak a little bit more about some of the ways that you're seeing women, perhaps in a younger generation, but also historically, really challenge those assumptions and those very firmly held ideas about what women can do, what women should do. How are you seeing that being challenged in the context that you look at?
Can I start?
Of course you can, yes.
Okay, so
You might need to turn the mic on.
So looking back to what I already mentioned, looking back to what I already mentioned, it's very interesting to say that younger generation in Iran, they are more powerful. They are getting more inspiration to be active, especially in political structure. So what I can say that is even from the registered candidates in Iran, so I'm just talking about my topic, most of them are females that between age 24 to 35, and that's very hopeful. So they are trying to make changes, and they know that can be only done when they can make change or reform within the structure rather than imposing the external thing. So that's what I see about Iranian new generation, especially women, that they're going with this attitude that we can do it, but we have to start it from the structures, from within the government. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking at the Iraqi protests that started on the 1st of October 2019, it started with the young generation. This generation, the majority of them were born in 2000 or late 90s, and they opened their eyes, if I would say, to the US-led invasion to Iraq in 2003. The collapse of the previous regime, insecurity, uncertainty. So the old generation like me, we thought they lacked a patriotic attitude towards Iraq, but they proved us all wrong. So I've got a couple of photos, but I didn't have the time to show it. That some of them, they were crying while they were listening to the Iraqi anthem, for example. They created their own approach to Iraq. They wanted to see a better place to live in. And in talking about Iraqi women who participated in protests since the 1st of October 2019, they have violated so many traditional and conventional norms in Iraq that have been set already by the new government that came, the post-invasion government that came after 2003. That government that institutionalized the Iraqi identity, sectarianized the female identity or women in Iraq. So the protest, I would say, offered a new approach to patriotism. So women, as I mentioned before, they have violated these norms by staying at night or overnight. They challenged curfews. They presented their artistic and literary skills. I mean, if I'm saying that to play music is even recently is considered as haram or forbidden by clerics and conservative and religious people who are dominating the daily activities in Iran. So they are trying to find a spot or to create an Iraq, if I would say, that would align with their own vision with sense of freedom of expression, no binaries between genders, and definitely social equity, political justice, and a full realization and comprehension of the needs of Iraqi people.
Thank you. Well, in Morocco, I think there's been huge changes in Moroccan family life in the past 20 years in particular. So I think in the 80s, families were still quite large, but now families are quite small, so people are having, I think it's what's the average, 2-point-something children per household. I think this has played a huge role in especially younger generations' sort of conceptualization of being. And in this, women have also, I was talking to, actually, it's quite funny, I was talking to another activist who was my age, so I'm 30 years old, and we were talking about women activists in Morocco, and I was saying, I've just noticed that, the younger generation, as in like 15 to 18 years old in particular, are just so openly anti-religious. Like, maybe we might not be religious, but we hide it from our family. And these young girls are actually actively anti-religious and are not scared to say it in the public space. And that's a huge thing, and I think, I'm not too sure about comparing it to other cases in especially in the Middle East, like North Africa has a different history, and especially Morocco has a king. This current dynasty has been in power for more than 400 years. So yeah, it's completely different political context. But yeah, I just find that quite interesting. And also in the past few years, there's been a huge re-identification to move away from the Arabized identities to a more sort of indigenous North African identity. I think it's commonly known as Berber, but people say this is actually quite offensive because Berber is a term that the Greeks and the Romans used to refer to the North African populations as barbaric. It comes from the word barbaria or something like that. So people have been using the word Amazigh, which means free man or free people. Man, because we're supposed to be what's a women? So free people, and women have been at the forefront of this. So a lot, especially since 2011, one of the demands of the 2011 protests was to have a sort of step away from Arabization. And so now people teach indigenous languages at school, but also these indigenous languages have survived, years, thousands of years, and that's been passed down mainly through women as well. So I think that plays an important role too.
Sure, in my country, the role of women has improved a lot with secularization, and it might be a bit different from the rest of the Middle East, as Turkey has faced West for the past 100 years. But still, my argument was that we have missed, because I didn't have time, was that although we see that historically in the media, secular media, career woman was represented more often in a positive way to encourage women as a Western ideal, or to indoctrinate the nation as a Western ideal. We see that the video that I wanted to show you was a part of a very secular media organ, and we see that the only people that are discussing the Middle Eastern politics are men. And I have analyzed these TV shows, like programs on serious Middle Eastern affairs, who are the discussion is always between the men. However, in this particular show that I wanted to show you, the picture was through, they were discussing, these two guys were discussing Iran and US politics, and they were discussing it through the images of women, which was very interesting. Because they were showing how Iran went backwards after the revolution through showing the pictures of vamp women. They were showing vamp women, women really with women images, half-naked women images as a personification of West, and as an idealization of how Iran prior to the revolution in 1970 was a very modern and Western society. And they are doing this through showing the pictures of women, which was very ironic, actually. I mean, there was no mention of women prior to Iran with careers, doctor women, or women lecturers, women politicians, or anything, but women, vamp women. So, long story short, I think women should be represented, women should come forward in such TV shows, whatever, in the media, in the Middle East, in Morocco, in Iran, in Turkey, because we have women, like academic women. We have lots of women who can go into that discussions, and because we are living in the age of media, social media. I think women should be more involved in social media and take the stage, kind of take a show from the men, because it's all men, it's all power, and I want to see more women. That's my because we see that men are not really doing well ruling the world. So I think women should be given a chance. So it's ironic. I mean, things change in the world, but things actually do not change. It changes. Many things changes. In the Middle East, we see that women have been involved more in the revolution. Women have been, the situation of women in my country has improved, but still, yet, actually so little has changed, because it's always the men. We always see the men. So they are kind of leading everything. So few people, so few women in the parliament. You mentioned that how many women parliamentarians are there in Iran? Yes, Iranian parliament?
Yeah, about 11.
About 11. How many it used to be before, like 20 years ago, maybe?
No.
Not? So there is still some improvement, but unfortunately, so little improvement.
Yeah, comparing to, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because comparing to, I mean, separation is getting more, but women are still more and more active. Before that, they didn't have, because just as you said, they only show us, okay, it's a revolution, they didn't have force will and things like that. But after the revolution, the number of women, and now 60% of universities are women in Iran, but they don't have proper jobs, but they are more educated comparing to before revolution, and they're more active in politics, but still they're not sane. So that's the issue.
The case is the same. There are so many experts there are so many, educated women, but we cannot see them. Where are they? Like they're expected to be housewives, and they're staying behind the scenes. That's all. While the men are literally the star of the shows. Yeah.
Or sometimes even there are women who are represented in the parliament, for example, are fundamentalists, or they don't even support women's issues or women's rights. They only follow, let's say, conservative view or approach. Even if you see women, because as far as I know, in the Iraqi parliament, at least 300 plus Iraqi parliament, and maybe 10 to 15% of Iraqi women, and could be one or two who adopt a secular view in supporting women's visibility and recognition, and empowerment of women in society. So even the trajectory itself is there is a backlash of trajectory itself.
Thank you all. I think you've all raised some really important challenges, I think, to look forward to, or to see, some challenges going forward that I think we're going to see women in the region react to, hopefully. I had lots of questions, but I have everyone's email address, so I can just ask them myself privately. So I might open to you, and I'd love some questions from the crowd to some of the panelists or across all. So I'll give the mic to Dara, and she'll.
You could choose who to speak.
Oh gosh, well, so much fun. Okay. Should we start with Hannah? I think she had her hand up first.
I had a question for Azadeh. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly. You mentioned two areas that you described as impoverished, having quite high numbers of women elected. I was interested if you could give us some insight into why you might think that is, and also whether or not they're like fundamentalist leaning, and if that was the reason they were elected.
Actually the statistics that I gave you is for 10th round of parliament, but it was very interesting because the number of women from impoverished area raised because first of all, lots of women there, they had a chance to be educated even though they are in poor families, or they didn't have time to be really highly educated, but even they were working, but they had this chance to be educated. And the second thing was that because at those areas, usually women, they now I think lots of women are working in those areas, so they prefer to choose women to know their problems, their challenges, and they wanted somebody to be aware of those challenges, like how to look after, how to, because the local councils, like, it's more like a civil society council, and it's like just for schools, for local council, and they things like that. So they usually prefer women because women, they are inside family and outside, and now they changed the rules. So they used to be inside, but now they're outside as well. So they have, comparing to men, I believe that they're more powerful because they can have access to both areas, different spheres, and then they can see, okay, these women need this one, or families need that one, or schools, and they are, those areas, they're getting more trust on women because they think, okay, as I forgot her name, as she said in Turkey, so men couldn't do anything, so now it's women's turn. So I think those areas is getting like this, and they are getting more trust in women, although they are very traditional families, but they know that they can do more. So yeah, that's the reason.
Thank you. My name is Nuri. I'm from Indonesia. I'm studying at WoMENA GPS with Yasmin and Helen. And I would like to ask to Aslihan, relating the identity of women in Turkey, because in 1987 the government of Turkey has already applied for the European union membership, and I would like to see your opinion about how women perceive to that kind of application. What would it be for the woman in terms of identity, if it whether it will be a problem in terms of their half European, they will half Middle East. What would you see about that? And the second question is to Azadeh. Yeah, it's about the quantity versus quality. I mean, maybe the number of the women that is involved in parliament is increasing, but how about the quality? For example, the policy that they already made, will it cater for women empowerment? And how do you see about that in Iranian context? Thank you.
Thank you, Nouri. Thanks for the question. It's a very good question, actually. And the thing is, to Turkey, the women are so divided between secular and Islamist women. So it's really hard to answer this question with a straightforward answer. But I can see that women are Muslim women around the Middle East are also very divided, even the religious ones, because of the sects and because of the ideals that they have. Even you can distinguish, you can identify women around the Middle East, and even within Turkey, with the way of their hijab, the headscarf they are wearing. So it's even in Turkey there are so many different identities of Muslim women that are, they express themselves, their identities, religious identities through their headscarves in different ways, in accordance with which sect they follow. There are so many different religious sects. Or I think this religious women really do not care about going into the EU or not, from just an observation, not based on any research. But it's the European ideal of European Union is more welcomed among the secular women, because it represents becoming freer, maybe becoming more westernized, which the secular section of the society has always been craving for, because this society, Turkish society, is based on that, secular and religious, and the secular wants to belong to the West, while the religious ones is a bit complicated, because they also don't see themselves as belonging to the East as well. They are kind of in between. It's very complicated, but I can see that as a short answer, the secular ones would be more embracing, secular women would be more embracing the ideal and would be cherishing the idea of becoming a part of the EU. But I think it will never happen anyway, in brackets. Okay.
Thanks for your question. It was a really good question, because I really wanted to raise it during my presentation, but I didn't have time. It's a matter of quality, not quantity, because in last parliament election, the number of women was equal to number of women in this election. But the issue was that those women could, most of the day, could unite like a women's fraction. And women's fraction's job was they were trying to approve the legislations in favor of women. So one of the things that they did in the previous parliament was the dual nationalities, the children who were born from mothers, Iranian mothers, and their fathers, if they were a foreigner, they couldn't get birth certificate and Iranian passport. But now, even if their mothers are Iranian and their father is not Iranian, they can get a passport. And that was a victory, because it's been for ages in the Iranian parliament, and they every time, because Iranian parliament they have like a guardian council, and whatever the candidates they approve, they should approve it as well. So it's like clergies that they have to approve the law.
So that's one of the achievements that they did. It was very slow, but at least they did something. And the parliament member that I talk about, her, Parveen Salashuri, she was the example of person who was supporting, even though she said that I'm not feminist, because if they say that you're feminist, then they can't go to the parliament. So they said that I'm not feminist, but whatever she did was about women. And even when they were trying to arrest women because of their hijab or things like that, so she said that we shouldn't do it. So it was very powerful. But this recent one, I don't think we are going to see such changes. I don't think so, because the quantity is the same, but the quality is not the same. So it's not going to be, positive changes in future.
I hope you got a question for Scheherazade or Hadeel. I think that would be great. So do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can just answer that. Thanks for all your presentations. So it was more like a statement and question. So are you seeing, with the role of women and challenging the gender norms through revolution, are you seeing the emergence of like a different kind of politics or feminism that moves away from sort of like liberal kind of projects, or like, Western savior type projects related to women? Because for a long time, it was about, challenging like, Arab or patriarchy in the region as a way to align with a Western colonial gaze. But like through these sorts of movements, we're seeing that it's also a challenge of Western superiority, Western kind of, intervention and things like that.
The two of you want to speak to that, actually?
Yeah.
Wait, I need to get the reference if you want to go.
Thank you so much. Well, before I attempt to answer the question, I'm thinking about while Azadeh and Aslan were talking about the gender norms in Iran or Turkey in relation to politics, that the clash between religion and secular ideologies all the time is seen through women's bodies, norms, and traditions. So whenever there is a clash, you'll say that the trajectory will be focusing on women's status, social status, political, and even sometimes economic. But it is true. I mean, from my own background and my knowledge about the Iraqi protests, for example, if I'm applying your question to the protests, for example, the protest in general came in to defy the institutionalization of Iraqi identity. The idea that Iraqi citizens, whether men or women, is seen through sect, religion, and gender, a recognition that the politicians and religious cleric have already created as an elite to the Iraqi society, which created this disparity between this elite and other people. But I wanted to say that I think Iraqi women, they by running the protest, they didn't want to follow any of these norms. They wanted to create their own social norms, that they have a freedom of expression. But I think that's the struggle, because they don't want to follow the Western stereotype. Because don't forget, Iraqi people had a very they had wide hopes when the American invasion came into to get rid from Saddam Hussein's regime, but they were shocked by the violations of human rights, like in Abu Ghraib, the abduction, mass killing. So there was a retreat of having trust and confidence in Western slogans, if I would say. So I think the Iraqi protest, specifically women, no, they're trying to create their own norms, that having freedom of expression, following what would offer them fair job opportunities, education, and their voice will be definitely heard in political spheres. So that's what I can say. No, they are after producing something different, neither the national and domestic norm, nor the Western stereotype.
I think in the cases that I've seen, maybe both. So very much in the rural cases I was talking about, where women were very active in sort of evoking ancient traditional forms of direct democracy. So the Bloul, for example, where they sit in a circle, and this also included, all decisions were made collectively, and this also included children's voices, and that was very much, I don't think there was any sort of there was definitely a move to sort of honour the amazigh of the sort of indigeneity. I need to stop using amazigh because I don't think anyone understands, but the indigeneity of of that specific village identity. But also, if we look at what happened in some of the social movements after Hajar Raissouni was arrested, some of the critiques of the collective 490, which advocated for sexual liberties, some of the critics were coming, especially from the Islamist circles, were, this is Western intervention, even though this is coming from Moroccan women and Moroccan men as well. Especially young. So if you go on the Instagram pages of Collective 490, you can see there's testimonials from people, anonymous testimonials that people send in. But yeah, I think this was by Hajar's uncle, Ahmed Raissouni. He was criticising these movements, in particular the Collective 490, because it was sexual, and therefore sexual means Western, and Western means Western intervention. So yeah, that was I think disappointing for a lot of Moroccan women because it came from Morocco. But that's an urban, and there's also a class divide there. This is very much an urban sort of thing to talk about, is individual liberties and sexual liberties and everything. But people who need access to water and who are fighting for land rights, that's not top of their agenda, definitely.
We're going to have one more question from Shahar.
Thank you. Thanks for a wonderful panel. Enjoyed the discussion. I couldn't help but notice that perhaps there's an underlying assumption here that secularism provides rights to women. And I'm just questioning that assumption. I wonder what role you see for religion, especially what role do you see for Islamic feminism? When we have Fatima Mernissi, Amina Wadud, people like that who have been trying to promote, advocate, lobby for women's rights, but from Islamic perspective. So how do you see that coming into the picture?
I'll leave it to any of you if you want to answer that.
Secularism does not necessarily provide women's rights. This is a fact. I think no one can argue against that, because it's more about the power imbalance between the genders in the societies, and it's more about the patriarchal structures that are embedded in secular societies and also religious societies as well. Unfortunately, in many secular societies, even in Australia, we have not gotten rid of the patriarchal power structures that are all-encompassing, and maybe we are here living in Australia, we are less aware of it, but still in a secular society there is these patriarchal structures which are confining women, which are deeming women less powerful as against men, and it is in some cases, like Fatma Mernissi argued, that it was the interpretation of Quran, not actually Quran, which gave women an inferior inferior status against men, which, yeah, I mean, it's all interpretation, but everything is interpretation in our society. So if we can reinterpret the Quran, why not? I mean, religion can also provide some more rights for women. It's not always, religion is not always a bad thing. And also, but secularism is not also a good thing. If I could have shown you my video that I prepared, and I actually wrote subtitles, so it's in Turkish, but there are subtitles. Like, from a secular perspective, the men are discussing Iranian revolution through the images of women, which is very pathetic, I think. It is nothing, there is nothing how do you say, it was really ridiculous for me to watch this video, and I see that what I wanted to emphasize was that secularism does not necessarily give rights or respect women.
So there's been a huge debate in Morocco at the minute about inheritance laws and what a lot of people, and especially the sort of more, especially the Islamist clerics, say that, evoke that passage in the Quran that says women should only, women should inherit half of what a man inherits. But there's been lots of feminist Islamic interpretations of that, saying, well, actually Islam is based on justice, and we should interpret it through current sort of societal norms and through the idea of justice. But yes, there's that. And there was another thing that I wanted to say, but it totally escaped me.
I think there is also something else I was thinking about, is a trust issue. I mean, through the experience that the MENA region had with Iran as a religious political system and a government, and also in Iraq nearly 16 years old, they proved that the interpretation of Quran or Islam doesn't relate to reality, doesn't relate to real life activities, excluding women or marginalizing the poor, or having this recognition of a specific elite and reading the distribution or passing the distribution of national resources to people. So that, I think, it created this this trust issue between those who claim that they are religious, or they would like to enact religious or Islamic teachings and make it real into people's life. I think that's created the gap between secular, between religious. And again, the clash, I believe, will continue in MENA area, and because of this clash that is trying to create specific identities that should be followed. Otherwise, anything around or outside this identity is not appreciated or recognized.
I think we've run out of time for today. I am very sorry. I know lots of people have questions, but please do stick around. We've got some food outside, and you can come up and continue the discussion there as well. Just before I let you go, I want to say thank you again to our discussants, our panelists here. So if you could please join me in a round of applause. And one final thing is to also say thank you to Dara, who's worked very hard to put this together. Thank you again to all of you for coming out today. I know we've stretched International Women's Day celebrations for over a week, I think, now, so it's really lovely to have you kind of round that out with us. So thank you again.
Thank you also. I'm cheering.